The night Daniel Walker lost everything. The world didn't collapse because of a judge's decision. It collapsed because he watched his little daughter's tiny fingers touch the back window of a car as she was driven away, while he stood there knowing that everything he built was gone. The house that held years of memories was no longer his. The family car that carried them on countless journeys was gone. The life he once knew disappeared in a matter of minutes. And as the car turned the corner, taking his 8-year-old daughter Emma with it, Daniel remained standing on an empty street, holding a small cardboard box filled with the final pieces of the life he had lost. Inside that box were only a few things: 3 old work shirts, a faded picture of his daughter, an old rusty tool he had used for years, and exactly $200. That was all he had left. At that moment, nobody around him could have imagined that this broken man would one day become an example of success, resilience, and determination. A man whose story would inspire thousands of people around the world. But before we continue, remember this: sometimes life takes away everything you depend on, only to reveal the strength you never knew you had. If you believe in second chances, hard work, and never giving up when life becomes difficult, support this story by liking the video, sharing it with someone who needs hope, and subscribing for more powerful real-life inspired stories. Because sometimes the biggest victories begin from the moments when everything seems lost. That evening, the cold wind felt different. Daniel walked into a small rented room above an old grocery store, carrying the same cardboard box that held his past. The room was nothing like the home he once lived in. The walls were cracked. The old wooden floor made noise with every step. The small bed was uncomfortable, and whenever it rained, drops of water leaked through the ceiling. But the hardest part wasn't the room. The hardest part was the silence. For the first time in years, Daniel had nobody waiting for him at home. His marriage had slowly fallen apart after years of arguments, misunderstandings, and emotional distance. The divorce was painful. Legal fees took away most of his savings. The family home went to his former wife because Emma would spend most of her time there. Daniel understood the decision, but understanding it didn't make it hurt less. The house was just a building. The car was just a machine. The money was just money. What broke him was losing everyday moments with his daughter. The morning conversations, the simple hugs, the little memories that seemed ordinary until they were gone. Every night before sleeping, Daniel looked at Emma's picture and wondered when things would finally get better. But even in the darkest period of his life, there was one thing nobody could take from him: his ability to rebuild. For almost 2 decades, Daniel had worked as a mechanic. He didn't just repair engines, he understood them. He could hear a strange sound from a vehicle and often know exactly what was wrong before even opening the hood. To him, machines were like puzzles, and he knew how to solve them. But having a skill didn't mean life became easy. Most repair shops were not hiring. The few opportunities available barely paid enough to survive. Still, Daniel refused to believe his story was over. One afternoon, while driving through the older industrial area of the city, Daniel noticed something that most people would have ignored. An abandoned storage building stood on the side of the road. The windows were dusty, the walls were damaged. The paint was peeling away. A small faded for rent sign hung outside the entrance. To most people, it looked like a place nobody wanted. But Daniel saw something different. He saw a beginning. He walked inside and looked around. The roof needed repairs. The concrete floor was cracked. The space was far from perfect. But Daniel had learned something important in life. A person doesn't always need perfect conditions to start again. Sometimes they just need courage. The owner agreed to rent the place for a very low price because nobody else was interested. After paying the deposit, Daniel checked his wallet. Only $200 remained. That small amount was now his entire future. He didn't have expensive equipment. He didn't have investors. He didn't have anyone promising him success. All he had was his experience, his determination, and a reason to keep fighting. With that money, Daniel bought a used toolbox from a local market. He found an old mechanic's jack that was being sold secondhand. He printed a few simple flyers and personally placed them around the neighborhood. Then he painted a sign for the front of the building himself. The letters were not perfect. The paint was uneven, but the message was clear. Walker Auto Repair, honest service, fair prices. It wasn't just a business sign. It was a promise a promise that he would build something based on trust. The first week passed. No customers. The second week came. Only one person showed up. The third week brought a few more, but it was still not enough. Some nights, Daniel sat alone inside the small garage, listening to the sound of passing cars outside. He looked around the empty workshop and questioned himself. Was this a mistake? Was he chasing a dream that would never happen? The bills were increasing. The rent was due. His savings were disappearing. But every morning, before the sun came up, Daniel unlocked that garage door, and he tried again. Because quitting would mean accepting that his life was already over. Then something slowly began to change. One customer came back, then another. People started talking about the mechanic who treated everyone with respect. They noticed something different about Daniel. He didn't look for ways to make extra money from people's problems. If a car needed a small repair, he didn't create a bigger issue just to charge more. If someone couldn't afford a repair, he tried to help. When an elderly customer needed her vehicle fixed but had limited money, Daniel reduced the cost. When a struggling father needed his car working so he could continue his job, Daniel stayed late into the night and repaired it. People remembered kindness, and they shared stories. Soon, customers were coming from nearby towns just to visit his small garage. The abandoned building that everyone ignored slowly became a place people trusted. But success did not arrive quickly. It came through years of sacrifice, years of waking up early, years of working long hours, years of putting every extra dollar back into the business. Daniel wasn't just building a company. He was rebuilding himself. While Daniel's business was growing, there was one thing he never allowed himself to lose: his place in Emma's life. No matter how tired he was, no matter how busy the garage became, he always made time for his daughter. Every weekend together mattered. He attended her school events. He showed up for her special moments. He never missed her birthdays. Even when money was limited, Daniel found simple ways to create memories. They repaired old bicycles together. They walked through local parks. They spent hours talking while Daniel worked on engines, and Emma sat nearby watching him. As the years passed, Emma grew older. She didn't fully understand the pain and struggles her father had faced. She didn't understand the pressure of losing everything. But she understood one thing clearly: her father never gave up on her. When Emma became a teenager, she would proudly tell her friends, "My dad can fix anything." Those words meant more to Daniel than any business achievement. Because for him, being a good father was the greatest success he could ever have. By the time Emma reached high school, Walker Auto Repair had transformed completely. The small, broken-down garage became a successful repair center. Then came another location. Then another. Daniel's name became known not only because of his mechanical skills, but because of the way he treated people. He believed a business was not built only with money. It was built with trust. Many of the people he hired had their own difficult stories. Single parents trying to create a better future. People who had lost jobs. People who were searching for someone willing to believe in them. Daniel gave them that chance because he remembered what it felt like when nobody believed in him. One employee later said, "Working for Daniel changed my life. He didn't just give me a job. He gave me another opportunity." Another said, "He was the kind of boss people wanted to work hard for." And that was the reason Daniel's company continued growing. He cared about people first. And surprisingly, that mindset created even greater success. If a car needed a small repair, he didn't create a bigger issue just to charge more. Daniel introduced affordable maintenance plans designed for everyday working families. The idea became extremely popular. More customers came. More opportunities appeared. Business leaders started noticing his journey. Then came the phone calls, interviews, magazine requests. The same man who once slept in a tiny room above an old store was now invited to speak at business events. But success never changed Daniel. He still arrived early. He still walked through the workshop every morning. He still knew his employees by name. And inside his office drawer he kept one special item: the old rusty tool from that cardboard box years ago. That small reminder of the man he used to be. The man who had nothing except $200 and a reason to continue. Then, one ordinary morning, almost 15 years after losing everything, Daniel received a phone call that completely changed his life. Daniel picked up the phone, expecting another normal business conversation. But the voice on the other side carried news he never expected. A major business magazine wanted to tell his story, not just with a small article. They wanted him on the cover. They believed his journey represented something bigger than business. It was a story about losing everything and still finding a way to rise again. For a few seconds, Daniel didn't say anything. He simply looked out of his office window, and suddenly memories came rushing back. The cardboard box, the tiny room above the old store, the nights when he wondered if tomorrow would be any better, the moments when he cried alone because he didn't want Emma to see him broken. All those painful chapters of his life suddenly had meaning. They were not the end of his story. They were the reason his story became powerful. A few weeks later, photographers arrived. Writers interviewed him. People documented the journey of a man who went from a struggling mechanic with 200 to the founder of a successful company. When the magazine was finally released, Daniel held it quietly in his hands. For a moment, he barely recognized the person on the cover. There he was, standing confidently beside one of his newest facilities. A man who had once lost everything was now being celebrated for everything he built. The headline described his journey as a story of determination, courage, and transformation. Across the city, people read about Daniel's life, and eventually one copy reached the home of his former wife. She looked at the cover silently. Years earlier, she had watched Daniel walk away with almost nothing. She remembered the difficult days. She remembered the uncertainty. She remembered believing that he might never recover. But now, the same man was being recognized as an example of success. However, the most meaningful reaction did not come from her. It came from Emma. By that time, she was a young woman preparing for her future. If a car needed a small repair, he didn't create a bigger issue just to charge more. She remembered the small garage. She remembered the smell of oil on his clothes after long working days. She remembered how tired he was. Yet he always found time for her. She knew something most people didn't. Daniel's greatest achievement was never the company. It was the promise he kept to his daughter, that no matter how difficult life became, he would always be there. Years later, during a company celebration, Daniel stood in front of hundreds of employees. Everyone expected him to talk about success, growth, money, business. But instead, he talked about losing everything. He explained that the hardest moments of his life taught him who he truly was. When the house disappeared, he still had his character. When the money disappeared, he still had his skills. When hope became difficult to find, he still had a reason to keep moving forward. And that reason was Emma. The room became completely silent. Daniel looked toward the front row. His daughter was sitting there, smiling. The same smile he remembered from years ago when she was just a little girl. And at that moment, Daniel finally understood something. He had not lost everything, because the things that mattered most were never things. Daniel looked at his daughter and realized that the hardest years of his life had shaped him into the person he was always meant to become. The house was gone. The money was gone. The comfort was gone. But the things that truly defined him were still there. His honesty, his determination, his love for his daughter, and his refusal to quit. Because sometimes life takes away the things we think we need the most, only to show us the strength we already had inside. Daniel's journey was never really about becoming a successful businessman. It was about becoming a better man, a man who turned pain into purpose, a man who used his struggles to create opportunities for others, a man who proved that losing everything does not mean your story is over. Sometimes the darkest moments are simply the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where you discover your own strength, a chapter where every setback becomes a lesson, a chapter where the person who was once broken becomes the person others look up to. So, if you are watching this while going through your own difficult time, remember Daniel's story. You may lose possessions. You may lose comfort. You may lose things you thought you could never live without. But as long as you still have courage, as long as you still have hope, and as long as you keep moving forward, you still have everything you need to rebuild. Because a person's true value is not measured by what they own. It is measured by the strength they show when they have nothing left. If this story inspired you, leave a comment saying, "Never give up." Tell us where you are watching from and what part of Daniel's journey touched your heart the most. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that better days can still come. And subscribe for more powerful stories about courage, hope, and second chances. Because sometimes the greatest success stories do not begin with millions of dollars. They begin with one person, one small opportunity, one reason to keep going, and the courage to take one more step. Just like Daniel did with only $200, an old rusty tool and a dream that refused to die.